Hey, it's Andrew again here at BTO Range in Conroe, Texas. And today, here on the table, is the Weatherby Mark V Deluxe. If you really think of American Deluxe style rifles, especially from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's hard not to think about the Mark V. This whole design of the stock and the Claro walnut and the gloss bluing and all the features that came with the Mark V just kind of screamed quintessentially American, what an American Deluxe rifle was supposed to be during that time frame. And there were a lot of copiers of that. We already talked about the Golden Eagle imported from Japan, and then there were the Winslow rifles, and all adopted this certain style with the big Monte Carlo cheek piece and the highly figured wood. So a lot of history on the Mark V, all of it revolving around a man by the name of Roy Weatherby, who in 1945 started his company in California. And really, he was a cartridge designer. His big push was, like a few other people, making bullets go faster, getting more velocity. It was all about velocity. So in 1945, he developed the 300 Weatherby Magnum cartridge, the 257 Weatherby Magnum cartridge, and the 375 Weatherby Magnum cartridge, based on unique shoulder design with rounded edges instead of angled edges and short necks. There was a contemporary of Weatherby named Parker Ackley, who was doing some cartridge work at the time, but the difference is he was taking existing cartridges, reducing case taper and steepening the shoulder angle to increase powder capacity. So competing versions of doing the same thing. Weatherby came up with the new case design and developed his family of cartridges around that. So he was looking for a rifle to market his cartridges with. So he started out building rifles there in California, primarily based on commercial FN Mauser actions and in these various cartridges. So as the cartridge line developed and the gun started getting bigger, additional action types were being used on the Weatherby produced rifles. So Schultz and Larsen in Germany, around 1955, they were being Schultz and Larsen actions were being used, particularly on the big guns, the 375 Weatherby Mag. A Matthew, M-A-T-H-I-E-U, and I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, had a left-handed action that was being used by Weatherby for left-handed rifles in his calibers. When the 378 Weatherby Magnum cartridge was introduced, they needed an even longer, beefier action, so the Brevex Magnum Mauser action was being used for the 378 and the 460s. And even Seiko in Finland, or Sako, correct pronunciation, in Finland, were producing some Mauser pattern actions that were being used by Weatherby, all during these mid-50s. So Weatherby had another engineer that worked with him by the name of Fred Jennie, Jennie, and they started prototyping and developing an action that solved some of the issues that Weatherby thought he had with the basic Mauser pattern. He wanted a completely enclosed case head. He wanted the ability to handle more pressure than even the 98 Mauser action could withstand. So any of those Mauser actions are really good through 70,000 CUP pretty easily, but Roy Weatherby wanted to increase that, the safety margin, I guess, if you will, to well over 150,000 CUP, if not 200,000 CUP, because hand loaders being hand loaders, and at the time that was the only way you could get Weatherby ammunition, was basically to load it yourself. Who knows what they were really pushing the envelope of what should be done. So he wanted to make sure that if there was a failure point, it wasn't his rifle. So they start developing what became the Mark V prototype. So some of the design changes were in the bolt, well, the entire action completely, but it went first to the bolt. So this is a Mark V were empty. So to remove the bolt on a Mark V, you just pull the trigger to the rear. So this is a nine lug bolt. So there are 3 lugs in a row, and there's 3 sets of them. That gives you a 56-degree bolt throw, but that's also basically an interrupted screw. So that when you turn that bolt handle down, it basically screws the gun together, if you will. So, and we have a completely enclosed bolt head here. We have a spring-loaded extractor, pivoting style extractor, and a plunger style ejector in this bolt. So they also designed that full diameter bolt so the lugs are the same diameter, exterior diameter, as the bolt body. So that meant they did not have to broach an additional raceway through the side of the receiver. They could incorporate a full diameter or more metal, I guess, more thickness in the receiver walls than you could with, say, a Mauser 98 or a Winchester 70 or even the Remington 700 or the Remington pattern bolt actions of the time, or even the Seiko, that type of those type of actions. So there was no bolt raceway or lug raceway in the side of the receiver. So all that contributed for the Mark V to be an exceptionally strong action. It's always been considered to be an exceptionally strong action, one of the strongest rifle actions probably ever designed and produced. So that was a real big marketing tool for Roy Weatherby. He was a marketing genius. He put his rifles, the Mark V rifles, in the hands of generals and celebrities, Lorne Green from Bonanza. And he used all that in his marketing tools. And he always positioned the Mark V rifle to be the Deluxe. This is the Mark V Deluxe, the Deluxe rifle. Expensive at the time, and still expensive today with today's money. So it's always designed to be that way. And he's had with the Weatherby company, still run by one of the Weatherby family, has had great success with it. So with the enclosed bolt face and the 9-lug action, there were some prototypes made in 1956. Roy Weatherby started to approach various European design manufacturers. Steyr, Schultz and Larson, who was already making actions for him, Sacco, and even BSA in England, to get this rifle put together, get this rifle in a production fashion. And there were some prototypes done, and the first 4 didn't work. BSA couldn't do the 9-lug action, and there were some issues with the other guys, mainly revolving around production cost in Europe. So the 5th prototype kind of stuck, and it became the Mark V at that time. Roman numeral 5, not the Arabic numeral 5. So in 1957, we see the first Mark V prototype. So he selected some companies in California to produce the components of the rifle. Weatherby's, up until 2019, from the beginning up until 2019, Weatherby's been a California company. But Precision Foundry Incorporated in California in 1957 was producing the majority of the parts, the receivers, the bolts. And those were investment cast, by the way. And if you want to go back and look at the Ruger videos we talked about investment casting. Weatherby Mark V initially was investment cast. The Precision Foundry Incorporated company in California. They also had Gardner Machine in California that took the parts from Precision, did the final machining to them, and then a company called Pico Industries, also in California, made some of the small parts like the sear and things like that. And they were all being assembled. Barrels were produced by Weatherby, and the stocks were produced by Weatherby, and it was all assembled at the Weatherby factory. So they had some problems with those PFI-based guns, the early Mark Vs, called the Southgate Mark Vs, because of either some problems with the casting process or some porosity or something going on. It was difficult to get the high gloss bluing that Weatherby insisted upon on his rifles, and they had an unacceptable rejection rate on the project, on the guns themselves. So that couldn't last, and so that whole California-based Mark V didn't really last that long. And then in 57, Roy Weatherby started or contacted J.P. Sauer in Germany, and J.P. Sauer is going to build the entire rifle. So they did that, and they did away. J.P. Sauer wasn't a casting company. They didn't have a lot of experience with casting, so they were going to do machined forgings, and they were producing the entire rifle with machined forgings, and the barrels were hammer forged. So the German Weatherbys, J.P. Sauer Weatherbys, that's the hammer forged barrel, and Weatherby was the first, I believe, the first routine or the first commercially produced hammer forged rifle barrel rifles with hammer forged barrels. This is very much a Monday today, folks. But in the United States, so it was a Weatherby Mark V made for Weatherby by J.P. Sauer in Germany. So that's significant because that changed when they moved. So in 1970, by 1970, production costs, bringing the guns in from Germany, having the guns made from Germany, got a little too high. So Weatherby switched production to the Howa Machinery Company in Japan. And Howa also produces and has always produced the Weatherby Vanguard rifle, which is the same as the Howa 1500 rifle with Weatherby badging and trim. Smith & Wesson brought them in as a 1500, Mossberg brought them in as a 1500, and Weatherby still to this day brings them in as the Vanguard in all of its submodels. So Howa also produced the Mark V for Weatherby from 1970 till about 1994. And 94 is when Weatherby brought Mark V production back to the United States. They first brought it back to a company called SACO, different SACO, S-A-C-O, SACO Defense in Maine, SACO, Maine. And they were producing the rifles, and then that lasted until, about 2000 or so. And then various other subcontractors were making some of the parts. There was kind of a hodgepodge of contractors making rifle parts being assembled by Weatherby. Until 2019. 2019 is when Weatherby opened its facility in Sheridan, Wyoming, and now the guns are Wyoming made. So that's where they are now. It's where they were, where they are now. So a lot of history in that Weatherby rifle, and we probably did not do the history part of that justice at all, because there's just a ton of it there, and there's just a ton of cool Mark Vs out there. How would you tell the difference between the different guns? Well, obviously the markings on the receiver are one, right? This particular gun is a Howa produced gun made in 1981. It's a Weatherby Mark V Deluxe, chambered in 30-06. Standard good old 30-06. So Weatherby did produce Mark Vs in non-Weatherby calibers, right? They did 270, they did 243, they did 30-06, they did all the standard calibers, as well as their more popular, I guess, 300 Weatherby Magnum caliber, for example, is one of the most popular, or most common calibers seen in the Mark V Deluxe. So it'll say made in Germany, made in Japan. This one says made in Japan, Southgate, California on this side of the receiver. But you can also tell from the serial number prefix, this Japanese gun has a serial number prefix with an H. The German guns will have a serial number prefix. Typically they start with a P, like in Paul. You'll see U.S. guns with a U.S. prefix, and then you'll see the current guns start with a WY prefix for Wyoming. So there's some ability to check that there. And there are serial number charts available on the internet. Weatherby Collectors Association, for example, has a fairly decent chart where you can look up serial numbers for the German guns, the early Southgate guns, the Japanese Howa guns. And there was another, in the Mark V, not the Vanguard, but there was another series of Mark V-ish rifle called the Varmint Master, which was a scaled down action that was made in both Germany and Japan in their own serial number ranges, 224 Weatherby, 22 250, but that's a different rifle worthy of its own video. So there are some differences. Not all Mark Vs are created equal. This is, as we said, a 9-lug action. So you have the 9 lugs with a 56-degree bolt throw. Now the earlier Weatherbys prior to 62, the safety was actually mounted on the receiver and it blocked the sear. In 62, that was a Weatherby patent. So in 62, that changed. It became the safety here on the bolt shroud, which actually pulls the cocking piece back out of contact with the sear. So the safety changed then. And this is what you see most often, so is this type of safety on the Mark V's. So there is a 6-lug action. Instead of the 9 lugs, there are 6. It's a 6-lug action. It's shorter, it's smaller in diameter, and it's lighter. So this the Magnum bolt in the Mark V, in the 9-lug Mark V, is probably the heaviest rifle bolt currently in production, or to my knowledge, ever in production, on a standard commercial hunting rifle. So the 6-lug bolt and action are smaller and narrower. So that makes a difference when you go to scope the rifle. So the 6-lug and the 9-lug guns now currently have a different hole pattern. So when you're looking at scope mounts, you need to make sure that you're getting the correct scope mount for the particular Mark V that you have. So if you have a Mark V chambered for any non-Weatherby caliber, and also the rebated precision Magnum, the RPM caliber, 6.5 RPM, things like that, typically those are 6-lug actions. Now, it's unusual to find the 30-06. There were some 30-06 and 270 Weatherby Mark V's with the 9-lug action, which is what this gun is, a 30-06 9-lug. It's a rare combination, and they're a little bit more collectible than a standard Mark V. However, I don't know that it's going to cause that much more money, except to somebody that really needs a 9-lug 30-06 to fill a hole. So what are we looking for with the Weatherby Mark V? So this is a Mark V Deluxe. For the longest time, you had your choice of Mark V Deluxe or Mark V Deluxe. There wasn't a whole lot of other options out there. Now there's a bunch of different options. There's AccuMarks and Weather Marks and Fiber Marks and threat response rifles and high country. And I mean, there's so many different variations in barrel length and barrel contour and stock material and metal finish. It's really a well-developed line in the Mark V, but back in the day, back in the 70s and early 80s, and certainly before that, the Mark V was kind of the Mark V, and this is what you got. But it's what people wanted. People didn't want to spend the money on a Weatherby and get a plain-looking rifle. They wanted the over-the-top shiny stuff. So, and that's perfectly fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There are some detriments to the Mark V from a shooter standpoint of the Mark V Deluxe. And a lot of that goes to the trigger and the barrel. So again, this is a Hauer-produced gun, so it's a broach-cut rifled barrel, but we have a super small or super thin contour on these Mark V barrels. Standard length for the non-Magnum in a Mark V is 24 inches. The Magnum length is typically 26 inches. There's some variation of that in some calibers and some models. But the barrel muzzle diameter of this rifle in 30-06 is 550 thousandths, 0.550. So there's not a ton of room to do most anything with it. I mean, even threading half 28 would give you a minimum barrel shoulder, a very minimum barrel shoulder, to do anything with. You could probably put a brake on it. I don't know that it would be a good candidate for a suppressor host with a .550. So it kind of is what it is. And also, given that, Mark V's are great cold bore accuracy. I mean, once you get the gun dialed in, shooting it from a cold bore, you're fine. After about that third round, you start to see the groups open up, at least in my experience, with a Mark V Deluxe, you start to see the groups open up. Now, Weatherby's changed that quite a bit in the more recent models with all the different barrel contours, fluted guns. They've addressed that issue, and a lot of those Mark V's in those AccuMarks and Fiber Marks and even the backcountries and things like that, either come with muzzle brakes or threaded from the factory. There, all these things going on to it, and with a larger diameter muzzle, and they've addressed the weight of that with stock materials and things of that nature too. So they make it a more shootable rifle, or what the current certainly the current U.S. customer wants in a shootable rifle. So currently in the U.S., American hunters want to be able, regardless of whether they have the personal capability to do it or not, they want to be able to shoot at greater distances than 400, 500 yards and repeatable. And they want durable metal finishes, durable wood finishes, and not so much the shiny stuff that everybody wanted back in the 70s or 80s. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Steel and walnut is still my favorite. I've got a special fondness personally for the shiny stocks and the high polished blue, but maybe I'm just of a different generation. So what do we look at with Weatherby? It's the same thing we always look at with any particular used firearm. When we evaluate it, we're looking at the scarcity, the originality, and the condition, right? The same three parts of that triangle. So scarcity, Weatherby Mark Vs as a model are not that scarce. They are still in production. So not typically that scarce. Now there are some sub-variants that are more scarce than others. Obviously, the Southgate, the original 50s guns, the Southgate guns that are true Mark Vs are very rare. The German guns still bring a premium over the Japanese guns, and the U.S. guns and the Japanese guns are about the same, getting to be about the same money. But even so, within those manufacturer eras, there are more collectible niches, if you will. We already talked about this being a 9-lug 30-06. That may allow it a few extra dollars than if it were a 6-lug 30-06. So you have to find the guy, right? It's just like we've talked about before. A gun is just like anything else. It's worth exactly what somebody's willing to pay for it. And if both parties are happy, then it's a good deal. So scarcity, not so much typically, with some rare examples. Originality. So you should always have, on a Mark V, you should always have the Weatherby recoil pad. If it is something other than a Weatherby marked recoil pad, if it's marked Pockmeyer, marked something else, then we need to measure this length here to make sure that we haven't been cut. So just from experience and my eye, I judge from the tip of this Monte Carlo stock to back here, and it needs to be about 2 3/4 inches to 3 inches from here to here. If it's shorter than that, to me, it's obviously been cut. And when you start cutting this stock, then to me, it just looks strange because it's too short from the back of this cheek piece to where the pad rests. So that's a big no-no for me. For me, it renders a gun I generally won't purchase them if they're like that. So and then the barrel, right? So if the barrel has been altered, that may or may not be that big a deal. If this barrel had a aftermarket muzzle brake on it, as long as it was well done, I wouldn't have that much heartburn about it, especially if it was a 300 Magnum or a 300 Weatherby Mag or 7 Weatherby Mag or something along that line. So the bigger guns, the 340s, 340 Weatherby Magnum, which I don't believe they make that caliber anymore in the Mark V. And certainly the 375, 378, 460s, those were available with muzzle brakes from the factory, so they should have those just from a shootability standpoint. So condition, this is a polyurethane finish that came on these Mark V Deluxes, and they are prone to what I call crazing, C-R-A-Z-I-N-G. Crazing is where you see not necessarily cracks in the finish, but it looks almost like if you broke safety glass, like if you broke a safety windshield. It's got, it kind of granulates the finish. So that is, that really hurts the value of the gun when you see that. And obviously the bluing is the bluing, right? Check the bore on these Weatherbys. The thing about the Mark Vs though is when people had a Mark V, generally they took care of the Mark V, at least the original owner did. But how many owners has the gun gone through and you know, did the person that inherited the Mark V, did they care for it? They just stick it in a closet in a barn somewhere, who knows what. So but that's the same as with any rifle, not necessarily just Mark V. So what would you expect to pay for a used Mark V on today's market? Mark V Deluxe. Now there are so many variants of the Mark V. If you start talking about AccuMarks or laser marks with all the laser engraved carvings on the stock, prices are all over the map on those guns, and you have to research them each individually really to get a true idea of what the gun's marketability is. But the Japanese guns are typically the ones you see the most. The German guns in 300 Weatherby tend to be in those mid-thousand range, like 14-ish, depending on condition. The Japanese guns go for a little less typically in the Weatherby Magnum calibers. And then the U.S. guns, depending on when the U.S. gun was made and which version, they can be right in there with that Japanese gun. Now that said, there are some sleepers in here. This is a 30-06. It's a non-Magnum caliber and a Mark V, so it's not as desirable to the majority of shooters as, say, a 300 Weatherby or 257 Weatherby would be. And it's not particularly a rare caliber that you would find in a Mark V. So it's not the most desirable Mark V from a resale standpoint. So in order to get maximum value out of this gun, number one, this Vortex Diamondback's got to go. And we have to find that particular Weatherby collector that wants a 9-lug 30-06. So it's one of those deals where, you kind of discount it to move it along. This one's going to be marketed at less than sub $1,000. So I don't want to get too much deeper in that unless we get a community standards violation on the old YouTube. Don't want to do that. So there are some sleepers out there you can pick up is kind of where I'm going with that. It kind of brings us just a little aside. We bought this gun just the other day. Haven't really been able to go through it yet. But this has a Vortex Diamondback scope on this Weatherby Mark V action. So it's a little bit incongruous to see a scope like this on a Mark V rifle. Normally you would see a Leupold or you'd see something more upscale for 1981. This is a very typical modern scope, very affordable scope, and you wouldn't necessarily see that. It probably didn't have that. I know it when the gun was new. It probably had something different on it. So, how much do you value a scope when you purchase a used rifle? So, and that's a question we get asked all the time. So this is a great example for me to talk about it just a second. And we'll wind this up. It depends on what the scope is. If the scope is a scope that would bring a couple of $100 or more on the used market, like a nice Leupold VX3, Swarovski scope, something like that, we would evaluate both of those individually and come up with a package price that we're willing to pay for the rifle. But from a retailer standpoint, the scope would not stay on the rifle. The scope would be sold separately. Two reasons. First reason is if we're going to sell it as a package, then we've got to find the guy that wants to spend the money for the Swarovski scope on the Weatherby rifle. The second is we're going to maximize value, and if you're in business, that's what it's about. We're going to get more value if we sell those pieces separately. Now, this Vortex Diamondback doesn't really bring any significant value to the table. Whether this scope is on this rifle or not is not going to affect the price tag of the rifle all that much. So it really didn't play into the purchase price when we decided to buy the rifle. We didn't really take the Vortex into account because, quite frankly, whether it stays on there or we take it off and just leave the rings on there, it truly doesn't matter for the purchase price. Now, it may matter for the retail customer that says, oh, the gun's already got a scope on it, I can shoot that until I can afford a better scope. So we may leave it on there for that regard. It does kind of hurt my soul to see the Diamondback on the Mark V, but that said, it may help the gun sell. But that's how we anyway, that's how we evaluate scopes on rifles when they come in for sale. So that's a bit of an aside, doesn't really have anything to do with the Mark V. It's just how we take care of the scopes. And we try to give the customer the best possible package that we can when they bring that in. So The Weatherby Mark V, this is a 1981 gun made by Howa in Japan for Weatherby. If you like what we're doing, if you enjoy these videos, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I don't know if you know it or not, but we're the BTO Range and Training Center is part of the Big Tex Ordnance family. There's a whole nother YouTube channel for Big Tex Ordnance, a little bit different format, a little bit different focus on the products that they talk about. It may be worth a shot. Look at some of the podcasts over there if you like all that high-speed, low-drag stuff that we do over on that channel. So we appreciate you stopping by and leaving those comments and showing us all the support you have been. We appreciate that a lot, and we'll see you next time.